Hello, my name is Ron Russell with the Adult Education Section, the Department of Post-Secondary Education, and we're here today to talk about the GED essay. And we have two instructors from Southern Union State Community College. We have Karen Milstead right over here and Denise Haskins, and they'll be talking about the GED essay test. And the reason we're doing this is because it is a very commonly missed section of the test. Other than math, it is the most commonly failed area, and we think it's very important and information that you should know. What I'd like to do is give them a chance to talk about what it is that they've been doing, their backgrounds of it. Like I mentioned, they're English majors, and I'm a math major. I'm certainly not a public speaker either. So I'd like for them to be able to talk a little bit about the GED essay and what work that they've been doing to be able to get as much information to you as possible on how more students can pass. Okay?
I'm Karen Milstead, and I teach at the Southern Union campus in Opelika. I've been teaching there for 2.5 years, but prior to that I taught high school English, and my degrees are in English. So I have a lot of experience teaching the essay, and I just wanted to share with you today how we approach teaching the essay in our adult education classrooms.
And I'm Denise Haskins, and I have 26 years experience in public education, although I've only been in adult education for 9 months. I too have degrees in English education and business education, and so we feel pretty comfortable in teaching the essay, and I look forward to presenting this to you today.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. This presentation was originally given at the summer conference this past year. So some of you have heard it before, but what we have done is we have reworked it and included the information that was in the summer conference, but also have added some of our suggestions as to how the GED essay can successfully be taught. I'm going to start with presenting the survey results that we did prior to this presentation and our thoughts, our initial thoughts as instructors, and then talk to you about some of the surprising results that we got from this survey. When we started this presentation, we decided that we wanted to do something a little different, and we wanted to get the students' opinions rather than our opinions as instructors about what needs to be taught. We gave the students a survey, and I'm going to cover first what our opinion was before the survey, and then some of our opinions that we got after we gave the students a survey. One of the things we observed prior to this survey, and even beyond it, is that students don't really like working on the GED essay as a general rule. When we mention that they're about to study the essay, they seem very reluctant to, and the impression that I get is usually very negative. A lot of times they have preconceived ideas from past experiences. Perhaps they've not had a good experience in high school with writing, or they have been told their writing is not very good. Whatever it may be, usually they have a very negative reaction to writing the essay.
And another thing is the students are fearful of running out of time. And the reason they often run out of time is that they want to write an entire rough draft and then write a final copy, and there is not enough time on the essay portion of the test to write a full rough draft and then a complete essay. We as English teachers teach that way, you know, on the high school level, that you do your pre-writing, you write a rough draft, make your corrections, maybe have a peer edit, and then you write your final copy. But there's just not enough time on the GED to do both of those. And so what happens is they'll write a rough draft and then get probably about halfway through the final copy, and they don't have time to finish. And the readers for the test don't read the rough draft, they just read the final copy. And so they have to learn how to manage their time and how to structure their time on that.
And one other thing that we found that often happens is they misinterpret the prompt. A lot of times they'll read just the question that the prompt contains and then not read further. To be specific, I had one student in my classroom who took one of the practice tests, and the question is about one of your most important goals. She read the question about what is one of your most important goals, and wrote a beautiful essay about her most important goal and why that's her most important goal. But she failed to read the prompt underneath the question, which asked the student to write how they plan to achieve that goal. So I explained to her that had this been the real GED essay test, that essay would not have received a passing score because it was not on the specific topic that was requested. Now for some information about the survey that we gave. We gave this survey to 75 students in our adult education program, and these are students who are in 5 different classes. We gave it to students who are both studying and to take the test, and also those who have already taken the test. The surveys were anonymous. The students could provide suggestions if they wanted to about how the teachers can better teach the essay, and just in general what their impression of the GED essay is. What we found from the survey was rather surprising. There were 5 major areas that the students identified that they are concerned about. The first one is the topic, spelling and punctuation, gathering their thoughts prior to writing the essay, making the best use of their time, and then just overcoming anxiety on the test itself. We got some quotes directly from the survey about what students say, and these quotes actually, or where they use the wording that they are afraid about this or they are anxious about this. One person says, "I feel nervous, I can't write about something and have it make sense when someone's reading it." A common theme that we saw throughout some of these quotes was they want to choose their own topic, and when they go to a topic that they don't feel familiar with, then that makes them very nervous. Time, the second person mentioned that a big challenge is finding the time limit. Nervousness is the third person, is what they mentioned, nervousness. And then the last person also mentioned being nervous. So that was, there again, a common theme. Some of the concerns that they had is the topic, being able to write on a topic that they know nothing about often. Also, they feel like they need to know all the facts about a topic. A lot of them feel like when they get a topic they don't know much about, then they can't say anything because they don't know the facts. But one thing we tried to tell our students is they don't have to know facts. The essay is graded on content and not on how well the students write. So I've told my students in the past, make something up. For example, one time I gave in class an essay topic to where the students had to write about their favorite job and why it was their favorite job. Some of the students had never had a job before, so they had to make up a job and basically tell why they liked this made-up job. And that was an example of how they don't need to know facts, they just need to be able to write.
Aren't most of the questions very general, though? I mean, are they concerned that some people could be concerned about the specific issues, like you mentioned a job. If they've never had one, it might be tough to write about. But the questions that are on the essay test part are pretty general, aren't they?
Right. They're not asking for statistics or anything like that.
So, I mean, if they had seen some of the questions, typical questions, I guess it'd make them feel more at ease.
I think so.
It would, and I think both of us give our students a list of topics that other students have told us about, or topics that we've seen on the practice test and out of different materials. And so we've compiled those and we share that list with the students so that they have an idea about that. But along the line of what Karen was saying, if you're asked a question about an experience that you have not had, that it's totally okay to make up something.
Sure.
You know, they're so sincere about this that they want to tell the truth. But what I tell them, in fact, I told my class yesterday, nobody's going to give you a polygraph test after the essay to see if you're telling the truth. They want you to write a convincing, well-organized paper. They want to see that you can, you know, put some thoughts together. It's almost like having a conversation as we're having right now.
Sure.
That, you know, you walk up and you ask me, what's a problem you've had before and how did you solve it? Well, just think logically about that, because you don't have access to the internet or dictionaries, encyclopedia to do research on a topic. So any topic that you're going to be asked, really the answer lies within you because you've had the life experiences.
Well, there's a whole area in all the bookstores called fiction. You can make it up.
Right, that's perfectly okay. It is perfectly
That's
okay.
true.
Well, the students had some suggestions that they are ways that they think help them overcome some of the things that we just mentioned. One of those is instructor feedback. They love our feedback. And as they write essays, I think it's so important to give positive reinforcement. And I try on every paper to find the good things and celebrate those. I also avoid using the dreaded red pen. My favorite pen is a purple marker. Sometimes I'll use a highlighter to highlight the good things and put smiley faces along the way. I mean, you may think, well, these are adult students, they don't want that. Yes, they do too. I also encourage my students to write essays for me for homework. And when they bring me a paper, I always have a pack of extra gum to symbolize their extra credit, or a payday candy bar. So they get some kind of attention and reward for that. And they respect our feedback, and they crave that one-on-one instruction. Of course, I think you also have to have a balance there of being the cheerleader and the critic, because you do have to teach them the things that aren't correct in the paper. But especially early on, those first papers, we just need to boost their confidence.
And saying as many good things as negative things. Put some balance to it.
Yes.
I remember back years ago, that red pen, that stuck in my mind. And they never wrote anything good in red. Right?
And they said it's like the paper's bleeding.
Yes, yes.
Right.
But I try, especially at the beginning of the paper, to try to find something good to say, something in the middle, something at the end. So along the way, they're not dreading, reading what's there. I use a check mark, and as I said, the smiley face for things that I think, are positive in the paper. Another thing is to allow them some work on the essay in a group. Although they won't be writing the essay in a group on the test, it helps them to prepare for writing the essay in a group setting. And that helps them to kind of overcome their anxiety about that they might not say the right thing, or they may not write it correctly. Everybody gets to put in their ideas, their thoughts on that paper. They also like to use a variety of instructional materials. I have one of my favorite books is the Top 50 Writing Skills by Contemporaries. I think it does a great job of taking the students step by step through writing the essay. We also use the Contemporaries website. In the language portion, the students are required to write an essay. And you said that you have a favorite book.
Yeah, we use the GED essay book by Contemporaries. One reason I like it is because they explain what the essay is like on the test. They explain the breakdown of the time, the scoring guide, just basically what the test is like, as well as give instruction about how to write an essay.
Okay. Another thing the students said is they felt that it's important to practice writing, whether that's journal writing, writing in class on a regular basis. But I think in their personal lives, maybe they don't write that much. And so they need opportunities in class to write. And so they said that they thought it was important to practice that skill.
Does that need to be done every day?
That wouldn't be a bad idea. Now, I don't know
The more the better.
Yeah, how teachers would feel about
I've visited some classes before where the teacher, maybe for 10 minutes or sometime, would have them just practice writing for just 10 minutes each time, and they just knew that was coming. And instead of just making a big essay each time, it was just to get the practice of writing, just to make that transfer from thought to paper.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, and a lot of it, there are different circumstances. A lot of it depends maybe on how big the class is, how much time the teacher has to read over the papers and get it back to the students.
Sure.
But in general, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, these are some things that the students said about in their suggestions to the teachers. One is, what makes me better is the support that the teacher gives me when I'm working hard. See, that teacher feedback is, what they're saying. The teacher's opinion on what I need to do to make it better helps. Feedback from the people I let read my essay helps. I encourage my students, if you have someone in your household who is a college graduate, high school graduate, get them to read your paper for you, the one that you've written for homework, and go over it with you and point out some things maybe that you need to change. And then finally, I can do better working in a group of people in hearing what they have to say. Now, you had a little differing opinion on working in a group. What was that you thought about working in a group for them?
A lot of times, I have them start out working individually because they just don't have the self-esteem and the confidence in their writing to let other people read it. And so a lot of times I don't want to put that pressure on them to feel like they have to make it good enough for other people to read it. I want them just to be able to write, just to practice writing.
Earlier we mentioned this, that students often are concerned about the grammar, the punctuation, spelling, capitalization. To them, that's the main focus in writing a paper, is getting all the technical details down pat. Whereas, we want them to understand that the paper should address a whole topic, and it should have a flow to it. An idea is developed, and then that idea is carried throughout the paper. And I think that's one thing that's surprising is that, as English teachers, we're all into the pre-writing, webbing, brainstorming, listing, and getting those ideas out. And then we want them to put the ideas together. The students, on the other hand, when they think of writing a paper, they're concerned about all the little marks and all the technical things. So we decided that we have different ideas than the students have in what's important in writing that paper. They're not concerned about planning that paper. Just give me the pen and let me start writing. And so, but we think, take a few minutes, make a list, make a web, make some type of visual that you can work with to help you remember your order of ideas. But they just want to jump right in and start writing that rough draft all the way and then copying it over into that final copy. So we have different approaches that our students have in how to go about writing that paper. How can we address those concerns?
Well, one thing we wanted to start out telling you is how we can address students' concerns. From this survey and the concerns they identified, how can we as instructors address those? And then we're going to talk a little bit more after that about how we as instructors can address further concerns. One thing that we can do is teach them test-taking strategies. We need to teach them the scoring guide, how the essay is scored, why some things are more important than others, and also teach them to have a holistic approach to the essay, not focus on details so much. Teaching test-taking strategies is important if they're anxious about running out of time or if they have trouble getting started. One thing we need to do is make sure they know how to address the prompt and to make sure they're reading the prompt carefully. We need to teach them how to structure their time, that they need to put some time into pre-writing, writing, and revising, that, as you said before, they don't need to write out an entire rough draft, as so many of them do. They need to figure out a way to structure their time so that they break it down into different sections. We need to teach them pre-writing tools they can use. There are all kinds of different tools that we as instructors have used that we'll talk about in a little bit, but they need some way to prepare for the essay test. Then also how they can overcome anxiety. One thing that I tell students to do, if they're having trouble getting started, if they have writer's block and they just don't know how to get started, I'll tell them to write something on that paper. I think what scares them a lot is seeing that blank piece of paper. They just see it and they freeze. And I tell them, even if you just write, I don't know what to say on the paper, get something on the paper so that you're not staring at a blank piece of paper. I try to encourage them to make lists, whatever it may be, to get something down. We have talked about making it conversational. If they can't think of what to write, think of what they would say to somebody else and write that down on the paper. So those are some techniques that I've used in my classroom. Are there others beyond that you've found to be helpful?
Well, that made me think about a young man who recently had the topic on a practice test of teaching someone else something that you know how to do. And he left the paper blank, and he brought his test to me and said, I couldn't think of anything to say. I don't know how to do anything that I could teach anybody else how to do. And I said, well, you have to know that not only do you have to make a particular score on the multiple choice, but you must write the essay. If you don't write an essay, you don't pass the language. You have to do both parts, the multiple choice and the essay. And I said, tell me something that you know how to do. Well, he said, I just can't think of anything. I said, I hear you every day talk about going fishing when you leave here. You know how to fish. He said, you're right, I do. I mean, he was so excited. He went right back in that room and wrote a great essay on going fishing. Mm-hmm. And so I said, see, it's not anything too difficult. You're making this harder than it has to be. Mm-hmm. Think about something from your own life.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be perfect the first time.
Right.
No, that's one thing that I struggled with learning how to write in school years ago, is that you're told all these things, the red ink, you're afraid to make mistakes. But if you just start writing, and I think with the use of computers now, that makes it easier too, because you can always edit things so quickly. Mm-hmm. But if you can just get past that process and just start writing, I think it makes a difference.
Yeah. And just write about what you know about.
Sure.
Write about what you can't write about anything you don't know about, because you don't have access to do the research at that moment. So your mind,
make it up.
Or make it up. Yeah, just your mind. You make it up, or you use part of what's happened to you, and then you embellish it. You make it sound better mm-hmm. than it really happened, or worse than it really happened. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really important for them to know that. Make it a conversation. We're having a conversation about a problem I had one time. How do I solve that problem? We're having a conversation. You're telling me how you painted your house this past mm-hmm. week. That's your paper, because you're explaining to someone else how to do that particular thing. But on the other hand, they do need to know some technical things, especially after they have written those first few essays. They do need to know about the scoring guide. They do need to know more about the punctuation and the grammar and that kind of thing. But I think early on especially, it's a confidence building time. And then we really get into the scoring guide.
Right. And I think most of you have seen this scoring guide. I show it to the students. I actually show them the scoring guide. And these are the reasons I show them the scoring guide. I explain the approach that the graders take. They're not looking at punctuation, grammar, and so forth primarily. They're looking at the other things emphasized on the scoring guide. I'll use sample essays a lot of times to demonstrate what I mean by this. But first of all, I show them this scoring guide. I show them the breakdown of the 5 areas. I'm not showing them this to get them to read the whole thing and understand the whole thing. I think this is overwhelming to them. But what I do is I sit down and explain those 5 areas, and I show them if their main concern about writing is commas. That is such a small concern on the grand scheme of things as far as how this is scored. It's just one part of one section, the conventions, and basically all grammar falls under that. And so I tell them that there are other things that are just as important, if not more important, than grammar and punctuation. One of those is responding to the prompt. And 2 things that I focus on first when I'm having students write essays is organization and development. That is an area that often many of them don't know that they need to work on. And so I address that first rather than overwhelming them with a lot of different grammar rules. And then word choice, there again, I save that for later on because it's a smaller issue as far as how to address that. A lot of times, to me, it's easiest to address the larger issues, the whole scale approach that the reader is going to be using rather than the grammar and so forth.
Could I add something to that?
Sure.
The staff in the adult education section, most of us have been certified to be readers to be able to score the essays. We've done that in the past, and I was one of the ones that went through the training to be able to do this. And that's the reason I'm wanting to stress the scoring guide as being very critical in the classroom, because we mentioned bits and pieces of grammar or structure of sentences and things like this, and that's just one small piece of it. It's the whole thing. It's the holistic approach. And I'll go back to some of the essays that I've scored before, and as long as the students, the candidates had something to say, how they said it was not as important lots of times to be able to get a passing score. And I remember some that had some pretty poorly written grammar, sentences, organization, but if you really dig deep, you could find that they're actually trying to say something, and they were saying it in their own way. So it's a holistic approach, and none of these parts are any more important than the other. It's the whole thing together. And we have a lot of essays that were 2s. I think over half of the ones that are scored are 2s, so there are going to be mistakes throughout, all different kinds of things. But as long as they're saying something and had used up some of the paper, I mean, I hate to be so basic about that, but as long as they can actually say something, you can't say something in just a few lines. You have to actually say something to get that minimum that's 2. So if they're borderline, they can get that together that way. I would encourage all the teachers to have the scoring guide handy and for the students to be able to see firsthand how these essays are going to be evaluated, and have samples like what Karen said just a minute ago, to have some samples that they'd be able to see, well, this is not that great of an essay, but it's a passing essay. And maybe they could feel more confident that they can do it in some way.
And it's not that long of an essay, too, to
No.
be passing. Some of them think they have to write very lengthy essays, and they don't.
Well, I'm not encouraging people to do the minimum, but I'm wanting those that are close or not. Some of the ones that maybe had struggled. We got some essays that were just blank sheet of paper. There's nothing you can do about that. And they're going to fail the whole GED because of that.
Yes.
So some struggle with that hesitancy, and if we can just get them to just start writing, just something, I think can go a long ways to get them to be able to pass.
Okay, and I don't mean to throw us off on this, but Karen says then don't. But where can teachers find a copy of the scoring guide? Where is that located?
Well, there are several different locations, and I've listed this at the end of the PowerPoint on the
okay.
resources page. But the Contemporary's Top 50 Writing Skills has a scoring guide in it. The GED essay book, as well as the GED Language Arts writing book, has a scoring guide in it. And it's also in the manual, the teacher's manual for the GED practice test, because when we give the practice test, obviously we have to score them. So an explanation is in that guide,
And I
too.
can email that to everyone when we send out information about this presentation, so that all the directors would have it, and they can in turn make copies for their teachers as well. So we just have it in everybody's hands. I
Right.
think it would go a long ways.
All right. I just want to make sure we all knew where
Yeah.
we could find that. Now we just want to recap some of the issues that we've talked about already. One of those is the issue of topic and practicing the different topics with the students, letting them write on various topics, either as journal entries or in groups. Address their concerns with spelling and punctuation. And I think a lot of those concerns are covered as the students prepare for the language multiple choice. Because as they prepare for the language multiple choice, they have to make those decisions about spelling and punctuation, word usage, and that kind of thing. So I think that they get their practice in that area so that maybe by the time they're writing their papers, we don't have to mark a lot of those kinds of mistakes. We need to equip our students with how to gather their ideas, teach them how to pre-write, how to brainstorm. And Karen and I have talked about this a good bit, that students who have been in high school recently and have taken the, writing assessment, the high school writing assessment, then in 5th grade, 7th grade, 10th grade, they had to write papers. And so a lot of those students are familiar with this format because especially in the 7th grade and the 10th grade where they had to write a full-length essay, they've had instruction in this. So this isn't the first time they've ever done it. But some of our students who are more mature, they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, they did not come through school when there was a state writing assessment. Yes. And some of them did not make it into senior high school where they would have written many essays and research papers. And so, if they quit school in the 8th or 9th grade, they didn't get that far to have that instruction. So you actually find a variety of student needs in the classroom, with knowing how to gather their thoughts and how to organize it, how to use their time wisely, and really just how to stay calm. Because, as I said, those students who have been a part of the direct writing assessment, they've been taught those test-taking skills, and they know how to pace themselves, use their time wisely, and develop that paper. But then we're working with other students who have not had that opportunity. Karen and I have different approaches about how we teach writing, and I've learned from her approach, and
I've learned from your
well,
approach.
I hope you could learn something, and I'm sure all of you have different approaches, which we would like to hear as well. To find, there's no magic formula. You have to find what works for you and what works for your students. What is it that you do?
Well, our two approaches overlap in some ways. I have more of an individual approach and Denise has more of a group approach, but we both provide individual and group feedback. Basically, this is my process. When I start a student working on the GED essay, the very first thing I have them do is write me a diagnostic essay. And they cringe when I tell them that they have to write an essay, but I tell them there are no rules for this first essay. It's just to let me see what they need to work on. So try to keep it as low-key as possible. I tell them it's not going to be graded. It's just a sample. So that's the starting point. After I grade that, or after I read over that, and I'll make a few comments, but I won't mark grammar or anything like that, I have them read that first chapter in the GED essay book to explain to them what the essay test is like, what the scoring guide is like, and then I sit down with them and go over that. And I also sit down with them and go over the sample essay that they've given me. And the number one thing that I try to do is give them positive feedback. You can always think of something positive, even if it's just you have very nice handwriting. It's something to boost their self-esteem. And then I'll tell them about 2 areas that they need to work on. I don't go into grammar. We don't talk about subject-verb agreement, anything like that. I'll suggest that they need to organize better and use more transitions, or they need to add some more details, whatever it may be. But I choose 2 big whole-scale approaches rather than addressing the little needs as far as grammar. And after we do that, then I will give them a chance to write some essays to work on those skills. To begin with, I let them choose a topic, and I don't time them. I don't give them a time limit. It's just very low-key, and I let them choose what they want to write about. Then eventually I will select a topic, usually a more difficult one than they select, and we'll time them as well to give them practice for the real test. As I write these practice essays, I read them individually. I sit down with the students individually and go over comments that I've written and go over some improvements that they've made as well as things that they need to work on. I do some whole class instruction and group instruction, but most of what I do after the whole class instruction is individual rather than pairing them up or putting them in the groups. And then we just keep on. Once they get organization nailed down, then we work on development. Once they get that nailed down, we'll work on sentence structure or whatever it may be. And we just continue practicing with 1 or 2 areas at a time.
And then on the other hand, every few weeks, we will write a whole class essay. I will actually go to the board and we'll take a topic and discuss that topic and brainstorm it together. I'll show them how to make a web or how to make a list of their ideas. And then we look at that web or the list, and we'll actually mark through the ones that we came up with that aren't really relevant. These ideas really shouldn't go in the paper. And then we try to look at our ideas and say, what's a logical order? Chronological order, order of importance. Do I want to put my first idea first and then go down to my least, or do I want to do my least important idea and build up to my most important? What structure would lend itself in this paper? And so we talk about that as a class. Everybody contributes. And then we start to develop the paper and write the first paragraph, that general statement, that broad statement at the beginning of the paper. And then a more specific statement that is our thesis statement. And we'll name the 3 subtopics that we're going to discuss in the paper. At that time, I love to just pause and go over the comma usage after items in a series. Because since I know I'm going to introduce 3 paragraphs, I'm going to have 3 ideas. I also like to interject a little bit about parallelism there, because to me that's one of those skills that if you have it, you have it, and if you don't, you just don't. And it's sometimes for them it's one of those light bulb moments that I just love, because once you show them that you have those ing words or the ed words, that all those are written in the same form, the same structure. Like in my pastime, I like to go swimming, hiking, and reading. So I have 3 things I like to do, all ending in ing. Or I can write them as infinitives: to swim, to hike, to read. So we take that moment to go over, a little punctuation, parallel structure, and I tell them, think like a college student. You're almost a college student. So let's branch out here and let's go for some punctuation that maybe you would not typically use. So I encourage them or challenge them to do that. Use that semicolon in there somewhere. Let's learn how to use that. So I know that may sound like, well, gosh, you're just working with some basic students here, but the ones who are ready for that, I want them to know that and hear that information. And the ones who aren't ready, well, it's time for them to be introduced to that idea.
It's more non-threatening.
Right, it is. It is. And they see it as a whole group. I'm not trying to sit there on a piece of paper and show them how to do that. So all this time we're doing this on the board, and then we take our first idea, develop that in the paragraph, and I say, okay, we need some mortar between our bricks. We don't need to just stack bricks on top of each other. We've got to put some glue in between there. So we go back and we look at some transitional expressions. In addition, first, second, then, next, finally, in conclusion, and we add some of that glue between our bricks. And then we develop each one of those topic paragraphs until we get to the concluding paragraph, and where I tell them, don't just copy the first paragraph into the last paragraph, but basically you're saying the same thing in the last paragraph that you said in the first paragraph. Just reword it. So if you use those gerunds in the first paragraph, the ing words, well, then use them as infinitives to swim, to hike, to read in the last paragraph. So reword it a little bit, rework it. After we do that whole class paper, I will type up that paper and distribute it to the students so they have a model for one of the topics. Then a few days later, we'll do the same kind of thing, but they'll do it in a small group, maybe with 4 or 5 people. I will put maybe 3 topics on each table, and they get to choose one. So they're making decisions as a group, and it's so interesting to watch them because, a leader of that group will inevitably emerge. And so they work in a group. They do the same thing that we just did on the board. They take a topic, develop an essay. Generally, one person out of that group is usually a typist. And so we'll get that person to type the group paper. And again, it's really neat to see them all hovering around the computer, giving advice on how everything should look. And then, their grammar mistakes and spelling mistakes have the green and the red wavy lines under them, so they get that opportunity to make those corrections. Then they present that to the class. If there's somebody who does not want to present, then, I'll read the paper to the class. Then I make copies of those papers, usually on the back and the front of a sheet, distribute that to the class. Well, then they have about 5 more pretty much perfect essays that they can study. Then we work our way down that they work with a partner on a paper. And then finally, they write an individual paper. So by the time they have written an individual paper, we have done a whole class, a small group, a partner. Then they're on their own. In addition to that, I encourage them to write the papers for me for homework and bring those in so that, they become a natural at it and they're not so intimidated. Karen and I both use some teaching tools. One of those is just a general explanation. Some students learn better with a verbal explanation. Some students learn better with a visual explanation. And so we cover both ways. So if we are addressing a student who is a visual learner, then we have something there for you. If you need to read the instructions to know how to do it, we've got that for you too, so that we can cover both bases. And then we also have a sample essay that we will share with you. But Karen's going to go over the general explanation that we both like to use.
This is something that I feel like is useful to them because it breaks the paragraphs of the essay down, and it tells them that in the introductory paragraph they need to introduce the topic to the reader, and just remember that the reader does not know about the topic or does not know what this person intends to say about the topic. A lot of times I have students who don't know what to say and they don't have enough in their paper because they're forgetting that the reader doesn't know what's in that student's mind, that they need to thoroughly explain themselves. So when they do paragraph 1, the introduction, this handout right here explains to them that the way they start out is what grabs the reader's attention. They have that broad statement and then they narrow down that broad statement to the specific thesis statement. And that thesis statement lists basically the 3 main ideas of the body paragraphs. And then paragraphs 2, 3, and 4, the topic sentences, I tell them, are typically the first sentence of paragraph. They are not always that way, but usually they are, and I try to keep it simple with this 5-paragraph essay. And I tell them that this is not the only way to write, but it is a way to learn how to write and is a way to write an acceptable essay for the GED test. So this explanation for the body paragraphs, and then paragraph 5 is like what you were just saying. They need to restate the thesis statement in different words and just use some way to tie it all together. And this says a final statement calls for action and validates the topic. So if they're writing a persuasive essay, then the concluding paragraph needs to give the reader something to think about how they can put that into action. And then if they're writing a descriptive essay, then they can end with a final just overall description of whatever it is they're writing about. And I feel like this just provides a very clear explanation for how to do that. And then we also both use outlines and graphic organizers. Usually the simpler the better. A lot of times students are overwhelmed if you try to get them to do an outline. So we have a tool we're going to show you that is just a simpler way for them to see an organizational pattern in the essay.
I like using graphic organizers because I think I'm somewhat of a visual learner. If you show me how to do something, what it's supposed to look like, I will try my best to make one look like it. And so I show my students this, and I've given them a copy of this as well. I've used this in teaching the direct assessment of writing for our state writing test, and I've seen students use this successfully. And that is, as you can tell, is just 5 rectangles, and each one represents a paragraph. Along that same line, I heard someone during yours and Leslie's presentation make the comment that she tells her students to remember that, on your hand you have 5 fingers, and so each finger would represent a part of the paragraph. Now I'll say here as well, I have students who will come back and say, well, I took the GED and I just wrote one whole page. I didn't divide it into paragraphs and I passed it. Well, okay. So you did. Congratulations, and thank you now for telling these other people that you did that I'm trying to get to write a paper in paragraphs. But maybe your ideas were so genuine, and maybe it was so well organized that's how.
Maybe it was just borderline.
Or maybe it was
you don't want a borderline essay.
No. You want to do. My goal is for them to do better than a borderline,
right?
So that I can be confident when they go in there that they'll at least do a borderline. But yeah, you and I don't want to say that to them. Yeah, buddy, you probably made a 2 on that thing. But I don't say that to them. But just to let you know, if you're sitting there thinking, well, I don't tell my students to write in paragraphs. I've done this for years, and they all pass. So, but I think, too, I want to think for the GED essay, but I want to think beyond that. If we want to send our students on to higher education, then eventually they're going to have to write a paper that's divided into specific ideas or into paragraphs. And so I like this approach of using the first block that shows this is your introduction. You have a broad statement and your thesis statement. And, I tell my students, you don't have time to write that rough draft, but you do have time to do this. Make yourself 5 quick blocks and tell yourself in block 1, this is introduction. These are the 3 things that my topic is going to be divided into. For relaxation, I swim, hike, read. So that first block, you just put swim, hike, read. I know that's what I'm going to talk about. Go down to that next paragraph. This is going to be my swim paragraph. The next block will be my hike paragraph, my read paragraph, so that I know my order, and then my conclusion where I'll restate that thesis statement. So yes, you do have the time just to jot these few ideas down. And I encourage them at this point to even go ahead and think about what transitional expression would make sense. In that first paragraph, after the introductory paragraph, the word first would make sense there. First of all. The next one, second or next of all. Third, most importantly. On the other hand, if it's a contrasting idea, for the last paragraph, in conclusion, finally, go ahead and jot those words down so that you'll be sure that you use those words along the way. And maybe then go back to each paragraph and think of a specific noun that has to do with that particular topic, with hiking, with swimming, with reading, and jot those words down. All right, now you've got your framework. You have your essay planned out. And now go to your paper, and you can look back and forth from your graphic to your paper to get your ideas. And you have that whole thing already mapped out without having to write it one time and then rewrite it.
A similar type of organizational pattern that I use that also works, I use clustering or webbing, and when I teach the whole class, the essays, the whole class, what we'll do is we'll do a topic together on the board. We'll take a topic and then we'll draw our circles and put the main ideas for the 3 paragraphs, and then branch off from there and draw more circles for the details, at least 2 details per paragraph. We'll fill that in with just phrases. We brainstorm ahead of time, come up with some ideas, some phrases, and just jot those in the circles, and then I tell them, there's your essay. All you have to do now is take those ideas and put them into sentences and connect them with transitions. But that gives them an easy way to get something on paper so that they can actually write down the sentences. One thing I found to be useful is to give them a sample essay and have them go backwards and take the paragraphs in that essay and put it into either a graphic organizer like that or into clustering so they can see how it fits together. And I found that to be successful with a lot of students.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
What I was going to say is that with a scoring guide, if someone makes this kind of effort for the organization, it will impress the reader to begin with. Just to have that much organization would stand out among all the others.
Well, good. Well, we have an essay to show you today, and it's written by one of my students, and it's titled Caring for Your Baby. And the topic that this student had was, suppose that you had the opportunity to teach someone something you know, what would you teach them? Same topic that my fishing guy had that I spoke about earlier. And she said the same thing. I don't know how to do anything. I said, sure you do. Tell me about what you know how to do. What are you interested in? What do you like to do? Well, just recently she had a baby. And so I said, you know how to take care of a baby? And she said, well, yes, I do. I'll write about how to change a baby's diaper. I thought, okay, I knew that was kind of specific to write a whole essay about it. But by the time she did her brainstorming and then she started to write, she had changed her entire focus on her own to caring for the baby in 3 different categories. And if you'll take a look at the essay, you will see that she wrote, if I had the opportunity to teach someone something I know, I'd choose to teach them how to care for an infant. Okay? And I like the word choice, infant, and then she has baby in the title. That tells me that she knows a synonym for the word baby. This is that general statement, that broad opening statement. And then she has her thesis statement. This process includes feeding the baby, changing it, and also bathing it. At this point, we talked about her comma usage and her ing words that she chose. Now, into the next paragraph, the first thing she talks about is feeding the baby. In the next paragraph, bathing the baby. And then the next paragraph, changing the baby. So in the same order that she wrote the thesis statement, she now explains those inner paragraphs. And as you can see, she says, when you're getting ready to feed your baby, you will need several things. They include, now she gives us a list. I like her list of nouns. That tells me that she knows what she's talking about, good word choice, good vocabulary. And on through that paragraph, she talks all about, how to feed the baby. and she concludes the paragraph with, when he's done eating, place the burping cloth over your shoulder and position him on it so that he is on your shoulder. Gently pat him on the back until he burps. Be careful because he may spit up. After the baby is fed, it's time for a bath and clean clothes. And actually, that's the statement we worked on, because she ended her paragraph before that. And I said, we need a little glue. We need to glue this paragraph to the next one. We got to tie it in. So we added that statement. The next paragraph, when you're giving your baby a bath, you will need a bathtub, a washcloth, baby shampoo, and on several other objects that she names. And then at the end of this paragraph, she says, dry him very well, and then you're ready to dress him. So that's another one of those sentences that we went back and we added because we needed to tie in one paragraph to the next paragraph. And then her third inner paragraph, dressing your baby requires a few simple things, colon. And we talked about that because she had just had a whole list there without the colon. And I said, let's talk about how you could use the colon to introduce your list, that you put this after the word following or as follows or after the word things to show your list. So she changed that. And she ends the paragraph with, when you're done with the wipes, be sure to put cream on his bottom. Fasten the clean diaper on him and then dress him in his clean clothes. And then the concluding paragraph is a restatement of the opening paragraph. Now, it's not just recopied. If you look at it very carefully, it's not just recopied, but it's the same idea. It comes full circle. Or once again, back with the hand, the 5 fingers, you put that thumb and that little finger together, and you come full circle. You start here, develop it, you end here. It all goes together. And her last paragraph says, taking care of a baby is something that I know how to do because I have a newborn baby. If I had the opportunity to teach someone to do something, I would teach them how to feed, bathe, and dress a baby. Follow my instructions, and you'll have a full, clean, and happy, hopefully, baby. And so this young lady, I think, is ready to go and take the GED. She has written some very good essays, and I asked for her permission to use this essay. And actually, when she wrote it a few weeks ago, I made copies of it at that time and distributed it to my class. And that way, they have several essays in their hands that they see that are model essays.
This is definitely a 4.
Well, good. Since you're a real scorer, I'm glad that you would say
I
that.
would think so. I mean, there's so many good features in it. The only thing I would add is don't put the diaper on backwards.
Okay.
Because I've done that.
Okay. That probably doesn't work well. I'll tell her that.
Okay.
And now here's just some general tips for teaching the GED essay.
We wanted to kind of sum up some of the things that we've talked about. And the first thing I want to mention is that we are teaching for a test, like it or not. And so we had to be product-oriented in our essay rather than process-oriented. That means that we need to teach the students not the process necessarily. That's not the main focus, pre-writing, revising, and so forth. But it's about getting a good essay. And that goes directly against what I was taught in English education and what a lot of English teachers were taught. But it's just the reality of what we're teaching. It's a product. And then most of this other, I've mentioned before, focusing on large-scale issues, structured approach. Be positive. That's very, very important. Can't emphasize that enough. And then avoid overwhelming the issues. Focus on 1 or 2 things at a time.
Great.
And that's what I would say as well. I think structure is very important, as you can tell from what with my graphic organizer. I think giving them something concrete to follow is very important, that they can remember when they go in there and they see that blank piece of paper. I think the other thing is, don't destroy their self-confidence by taking pleasure in marking up their paper. I love editing. Oh, I love marking papers. But, I save that for marking my husband's sermons and not my students' work. So, because it can be very demoralizing to them. And the other thing is just to remember that positive feedback and to rehearse writing yourself. it's hard to teach somebody else something if you haven't done it yourself.
That's
So
right.
take some of those topics and, rehearse them yourself, write them, and then you'll see kind of what the students are going through, and you'll be able to help them better if you've actually experienced
I
that.
agree. I wholeheartedly agree.
We've included a slide that has some of the resources that we use. A couple of them we have mentioned, but I'm not sure if everybody can read the slide. The print's kind of small, but we've also put our contact information on here if you want us to email you some of these resources, or if you have questions about what we said, or even suggestions. We're always interested in learning what other instructors are using successfully in their classrooms. So any kind of feedback you want to give us, here is our emails, our phone numbers, our location, so that if you'd like to, you can get in touch with us.
And thank you for joining us. And this has been a presentation about the GED essay, and I hope that you can take the information that you've heard today and have more of your students not only just pass, but score very highly on this part of the test. Thank you.